888-971 SAGE 888-971-7243. I am Larry Elder. We are ReliefFactor.com studio. Well, Joe Biden's at it again, referring to the Georgia voting law as Jim Crow. And he and Kamala Harris gave a speech about how these dastardly Republicans are trying to suppress the vote. We'll be talking about that later on. New Associated Press poll puts economy and inflation as top concerns. COVID-19 increasingly less important to people in the country. To that end, CNN Business put out an article, headline, Why Inflation Can Actually Be Good for Everyday Americans and Bad for Rich People. Completely inconsistent with what I studied in Econ 101. So I thought we'd ask Professor Lee Ohanian from UCLA to come on and address that article. Professor, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Very, absolutely.
Professor, by the way, it was written by a woman named Allison Morrow. I looked her background up, and she has a degree in journalism from Columbia, Missouri Columbia. And the other author at the end of it does have a degree in economics from the London School of Economics. Headline, again, Why Inflation Can Actually Be Good for Everyday Americans, Bad for Rich People. Professor, I thought inflation was bad for all of us.
Larry, it is. It's bad for all of us, and typically it's hardest on those who are the poorest, who don't have the same types of financial instruments and financial market sophistication that higher income people have, and who spend more of their income on the areas that are just skyrocketing now, such as food and energy, and more recently rent. So when I saw this headline, Larry, I just shook my head.
Well, they say that people who are working class Americans with a fixed rate debt, like a 30-year mortgage, well, your wages are going up, and the mortgage, I guess, the mortgage value that you're paying is going down. I mean, I'm not quite sure what this thing says.
Well, yeah, and when they talk about everyday Americans versus rich people, well, rich people have more of their assets invested in real estate than your average quote everyday American. I mean, from where I stand and what people tell me, and when I look at the data, those everyday Americans that CNN is writing about, that inflation is supposed to be benefiting them, they're really struggling. Their wages aren't going up at the same rate as inflation.
Right.
Inflation is now running almost 7% per year. Food prices are up 33% in the last year, as are energy prices. People are out there are hurting, and I don't think D.C. policymakers, including President Biden or Federal Reserve Chairman Powell, are really in touch with how much this is hurting people.
Professor, it's one thing for the lead writer who's got a degree, as I said, in journalism, a bachelor's degree in journalism, to write this. Another thing for somebody who's got a degree from the London School of Economics to be part of this article. How do you explain that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, Larry. I speak to a fair number of people in the media from various types of publications and media sources, and I often ask them what their background in economics is, and more often than not, they tell me they've never taken an economics course. They've really specialized in journalism, as one of the authors of this piece indicated. The person who has a degree from London School of Economics, that's a tough one to explain. That's a good program. So I really don't know what's going on there. They may have played a minor role in this article.
Now, I told you about the conversation I had during the campaign, and again, thank you so much for advising me on real estate matters, with a young lady, a reporter, and she was just going on and on and on about some article they dug up when I said the minimum wage ought to be zero, as if that was an issue in the campaign. And so I tried to explain to her that it's overwhelming consensus among economists that minimum wage hurts people who are unskilled. And I went through all the usual Econ 101 things. I told you, I think, before, Lee. And I said, who's your favorite economist? And she had a blank stare. We were doing this on video. It's a virtual interview. And I said, you can't think of one? She said, well, my econ professor. I said, what is his or her name? Blank stare. Couldn't think of the name. I said, have you heard of Adam Smith? She said no. I said, you heard of Milton Friedman? She said no. I mean, I said, you heard of Paul Krugman? He's probably the most famous economist in the world, not because he necessarily deserves it, although he's a Nobel laureate, but because he's got a column in the New York Times. She said she had never heard. She couldn't think, Lee, of a single economist while writing about business and the economy.
No, it's a shame, and you see this. You see this in major newspapers such as New York Times, the Chicago newspapers, the LA newspapers. Oftentimes, very, very young people who are writing these articles that just simply have not studied economics. And when you get down to writing about inflation or monetary policy or fiscal policy, tax policy, regulatory policy, these are really complex issues, and you might as well be driving a car in the dark as to be a journalist writing about these without any background or training whatsoever in economics. But what we now see today in a lot of media is that the economic journalism has just become nonsense.
My guest is Lee Ohanian. He teaches economics at UCLA. Lee, I'm having lunch one time with Thomas Sowell, and I said, Tom, you guys probably have studied the impact of the minimum wage more than almost any other issue in economics, and the consensus overwhelming is that these laws are harmful. Milton Friedman once said the minimum wage was, quote, the most anti-Negro law in the statute books. He said, that's right. I said, how is it you're not winning the argument? And he said, Larry, that's because most people have never heard the argument.
That's right. They haven't heard the argument. They read stories. They hear stories on CNN, read stories in the New York Times about how people deserve a raise and everyone should be earning a living wage. And what they fail to understand is that a lot of those people earning minimum wage are people who are 17, 18 years old, working part-time jobs, save up to help support themselves during college. They are very recent immigrants here in the United States. They don't have the experience yet. We want them to get the experience. We want them to learn about the U.S. way of doing business and be able to participate and contribute and earn a solid income in the future. But we're just cutting those people off at their knees.
Wow. By
raising minimum wages. And ironically, these are the people, immigrants, low-skilled people without a lot of education. These are the people that the Democratic Party often tells, hey, we have
Professor,
your back. Well,
we're going to leave it there. Professor, as always, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you, Larry.
You got it.